welcome. My name is Elizabeth. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm really glad you're here. Happy Halloween! Today's true crime, with a creepy twist, does not take place hundreds of years ago, nor does it involve a ghost. After sharing quite a few of those stories with you, I found a story about a girl who goes missing, and the man who was with her decides to blame, wait for it, Bigfoot. Yeah, Bigfoot. Sasquatch got her. And he's never brought to justice. This story includes discussions of the following topics: child abuse, psychological child abuse, SA, drug use, specifically meth, kidnapping, and possible murder of a teenage girl. If you're not in the headspace for that, please click away now. Go watch an episode of Community. Super fun. But if you're anything like me, you'll probably want to stick around for the ride. Okay, this is the story of Theresa Ann Bier. Now, she was born in 1971 on April 16th to Shirley and David Bier. Shirley was, she was not, okay, I'm just going to say it. Shirley was a bad mom. In fact, when Theresa was 3 years old, Shirley wrapped the child's leg around one of the crib slats and twisted it until her leg broke. Theresa would have to be hospitalized after this incident. Then there was also a story of the time that Shirley beat Theresa so badly that she broke multiple ribs. Scars from these incidents would be able to be used to identify her if and when she was ever found. That's how serious these incidents were. Okay, so Theresa and Vicky, her sister, would be taken into foster care and placed with a friend from their church by the name of Sylvia Pierce. Now, this is probably most likely the best time in Theresa's life. There was stability. She was with her sister. There was an abuse or psychological torture. It was just a place for her and her sister to live safely. A few years after this, David would divorce Shirley and get remarried to a woman named Margie Richmond, who had previously been married to Shirley's half-brother, John Richmond. The pair shared 2 children. The blended family is going to get very complicated, so just try to follow as best you can. So David and Shirley were married, right? David and Shirley divorce. And David marries Margie, who was married to Shirley's half-brother. Okay. Now, following the new marriage, David would regain custody of Theresa and Vicky. He would then move them to Southern California. Now, Margie wasn't much of an improvement over Shirley in terms of being a mom and abuse. It wasn't the same kind of abuse. Margie liked to use psychological terror on the girls. Like, for instance, she was known to lock the food up in their house and then eat full meals in front of the hungry children without allowing them to eat. Like, that is some serious, messed up torture. Theresa would then get moved again, this time to her great-grandmother, one great, in Fresno, California. Now, at this point, a man named John Richmond, who was known as Blind Johnny, would get custody of Theresa. Now, I don't understand how this happens, how the great-grandmother lost custody, or why it got moved over to this uncle, but this is what happened. So, Blind Johnny, his name might sound familiar because I mentioned him not too long ago. Blind Johnny is the half-brother of Theresa's mother and the ex-husband of her stepmother. Are you confused yet? Because I know I am. Okay, so let's take a moment and talk for a second about Blind Johnny. First, he got this name because he was blind. Okay, checks out, I guess. But how did he become blind? about the stupidest way possible. Playing a game of Russian roulette. Now, if you don't know what this is, it's when you take a pistol with 5 chambers, you put one bullet into one of the chambers, you spin the chambers, and then aim the gun at your own head and pull the trigger. Yeah, it's the dumbest game ever. If you lose everything. You know, like your life, which contains everything. Well, Johnny just lost his sight, so I guess he was kind of lucky. Or at least that's what he said. Some people said that he was not blind and could actually see just fine. Either way, we're not dealing with the sharpest knife in the block. Now, while blind Johnny did have a daughter with Margie, who was now living with Margie and David, he also had 2 sons. But these sons were not by Margie. These sons were each by a different sex worker. These boys were being raised by blind Johnny in his home, but that's not everyone who's living in the house. So we've got blind Johnny, right? We've got Theresa, the main character of our story. We have his 2 sons that were procreated through sex work, and there's another. Johnny's girlfriend also lived with them. Now, his girlfriend, an emphasis on girl, was 17 years old. Okay, so this is the house that Theresa would move into when Johnny got custody of her. Theresa was expected to take care of the boys, often expected to miss school in order to care for them. Like, her schooling was not important to blind Johnny. All he cared about is he had free childcare in his house. It is also rumored that blind Johnny and his friends would, I'm just going to say it, would S.A. Theresa. Suffice it to say, Theresa had to deal with extreme trauma, extreme compounding trauma. It's at this point that the school labels her as a slow learner, and they put her in the corresponding classes. Now think about that for a minute. Even the brightest of minds cannot properly function in the midst of trauma. I mean, if this girl is not getting fully fed, how do you expect her brain to work at its best, right? Now, I talk about trauma a lot because we all have it. I mean, in some ways, life is trauma. Anyone who says differently is selling something. That's a quote from a movie. Can anyone guess it? Tell me below. So, taking that into account, do we really think this girl was slow? Because I don't. I think that this poor girl was broken. I think she was fractured into so many pieces that her brain was busy trying to keep her together and functioning to worry about algebra equations or history dates. I'll get off my soapbox. My guess is that she took whatever chances she could to be away from that house, no matter what the option was, no matter what the situation was. If she could get out of that house, she probably did. That's just my speculation, but that's my guess. So it was in early June of 1987, I think it was actually June 1st, that Theresa would inform her 2 friends at school that she had met a man and that she had made a plan to go away with him. I try to remember that hindsight is different, but dude, you 2 didn't think to talk some sense into her? Convince her not to go? Then again, maybe they did, and if they did, then good on you. I hope you tried. I have no way of knowing. Russell Sheldon Welsh is the name of the man. He's a 43-year-old painter who went by the name of Skip. 43. Remember, she's 16. Okay. Mostly what we know about Skip is that he was a real garbage person. He was a known liar. He was a meth addict. And he considered himself an expert on Bigfoot. Yeah, you heard me correctly. I did say Bigfoot. He claimed to have seen Bigfoot multiple times, and I guess that made him some sort of expert. Remember, the aforementioned liar part of his personality? Keep that in mind. This is not a decent human at all. Okay, so I don't know much about meth. Except that, Walter White cooks it and it's really addictive and bad for you. But because of this story, I looked up what meth actually does to the human body, and it brings on an artificial dopamine bump, which can lead to delusions. Now, the dopamine is the thing in our brains that makes us happy. It brings on euphoria and joy. So the feeling you get when, you hit a home run, or during the curtain call, during the curtain call of a play that you were just starring in, or hearing that your good friend made it through surgery without any problems. Like these moments, these beautiful, happy, joyous, euphoric moments are felt that way because our brain makes dopamine. So what meth does is it imitates and brings on an artificial bump of dopamine. But too much dopamine can lead to delusions. So, sure, yeah, I believe he believes he saw Bigfoot. Take a delusional person, right? Russell would sustain his life with disability checks and spent most of his time, as most drug addicted people do, doing drugs, in this case, meth. His wife Sharon had been living the same kind of lifestyle and ended up dying in an overdose, leaving Russell a widower. Okay, back to June 1st. Russell would arrive in the morning at Blind Johnny's house. They were friends, so he just sort of stops by, right? He would ostensibly notice Theresa getting ready for school and offer to drive her. Blind Johnny would agree without a fuss. Now, this was all planned between Theresa and Skip. They had already planned this out, that he was going to show up, he was going to say, I'm going to take you to school, and then that way she could be in the car with him and they wouldn't have to worry about it. Their plan of leaving. So when Blind Johnny received a phone call from the school, about mid-morning, informing him that Theresa was actually not at school, he told them that she was homesick. And then he went looking for her on his own. He would, talk to her friends, whoever he could get his hands on to talk to, right? And her friends would all say that they didn't know where she was, but that her new friend Skip was not trustworthy. It's a really interesting piece of information to share, especially when most of them shared it without prompting. So most of the friends were like, I have no idea where she is, but that friend of hers, Skip, yeah, that's not cool. She's not safe around him. 1987, we're going to keep in mind that it was 1987. But I'm trying not to judge. Okay, so at 9:30 that evening on June 1st, Blind Johnny would finally inform the police that Theresa was missing. Now, the first thing that the police would discover was that on their way to the mountain, Skip and Theresa made a stop at Skip's daughter Chandra's house. He needed to make some repairs on the car. Sandra was known to have known just how bad her father could be, but she left Theresa leave with him without protest. Not cool, Chandra. And you'll understand why I'm judging Chandra in just a moment here. Now, Chandra would tell the police that Skip and Theresa were headed to the Sierra Nevada mountains near Shut-Eye Park. During the police investigation, a woman by the name of Michelle Ryan would be interviewed. They would discover by interviewing Skip's family and friends that the summer previous, Skip had tried to get Michelle to accompany him to the same location. But in that instance, Chandra had warned Michelle that her father took young women up there so that he could drug them and SA them, if not far more and worse. Michelle survived the trip because she brought 2 male friends with her. But she still thinks that she was given something to impair her in some way. Now, it would be 4 days later that the police officers would see Skip's car, this 1976 Monte Carlo, in an RV park near the base of the mountain. This told the police officer that he was most likely in the area. They would discover him at a friend's RV, ranting and raving. The friend would tell the police what he was ranting and raving about. And that was that the woman that he had taken into the woods was captured and kidnapped by a group of satanic worshipers. Well, there's a story. The friend he was visiting realized that he was in some sort of altered state of reality, and that was probably due to the amount of meth he had consumed. So this friend didn't put a lot of weight into anything that he was saying. But later, when the police were able to talk to this friend, this is what it was reported that he was ranting. Then, a few days later, Blind Johnny would get a threatening text message from a third party saying that Skip was after him and that he had a gun. Skip wanted Blind Johnny to call up the cops and tell them that Skip had delivered Theresa to school that morning safe and sound, and it was some other person who had picked her up after. I'm sorry, did I roll my eyes loud? 5 days after that, Skip would be arrested at his mother's house, but not for anything having to do with Theresa. No, he was being arrested for previous drunk driving violation. Now, this was just a way for them to get him into custody. Once you're arrested, you have to stay. You don't have to speak. Everyone has the right to remain silent, but you can't just, oh, you're just interrogating me. I'm not actually under arrest. I'm leaving. Here, he really was taken. He couldn't just leave in this instance. So, they begin a police interrogation on Skip, and he would tell them so many different versions of what happened to Theresa that it is dizzying. Okay, so he also it's so weird. He also started referring to her as Sam instead of Theresa, and the amount of time that I could spend unpacking that would be significant. But I won't digress. First, he dropped her off at school safely. What's everyone confused about? Okay. Then he changes his story and he says, well, they went to the mountains together to search for Bigfoot. Like that's what she was an enthusiast. He's an expert. That's where they were going. Third, he says that while on the mountain, Sam ran off with a woman for no reason he could determine. Next, the story was that she ran off with a group of young people that they found on the mountain. Then he said that she ran off excitedly towards Bigfoot, which they had seen multiple times that day. Now that's if you're counting, I think 5 different stories. But he would eventually land on Bigfoot got her. Skip does have one more very disturbing piece of information for the authorities. He told them, completely unprompted, okay, nobody asked, that if they find her, she will not have any evidence of trauma on her. What an insane thing to say. You want credit for not feeding off of disaster victims? That's a quote from a TV show, much, much more obscure. If you can guess that one, I'll be really impressed. It's just such an upsetting level of ick and creep factor. I mean, but he wasn't done on the subject. He told them that Theresa wanted to be with him and that he couldn't do it because that's just not in his nature to do. What? Sometimes I worry that people don't have any more than like 2 brain cells to rub together, and those 2 brain cells are arguing. Anyway, the police would then head out to the campsite where Theresa and Skip had stayed. Only when they arrived, the fire pit was still smoldering. The blankets had been laid out in such a way that was so clearly staged. And all of this would prove that this was not the site where the pair had stayed. Someone had visited this site the day before or that morning and set all this up. There was no way it had been there for the last couple of weeks. It turned out that he had actually taken them to a site about 20 miles away from the campsite that he originally brought them to. Now, it makes me crazy that he wasn't arrested. I know that laws and the legal systems are nuanced and, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is very aggravating, this story. So the authorities would search both areas. They would locate a blue shirt with meth in the pocket and determine it was Skip's. They also employed bloodhounds, and they did get Theresa's scent. but they lost it before they were able to really track her to anything. And that did prove that she had been in the area, but nothing else was ever found. Skip would finally be arrested and charged with endangering a minor and kidnapping. 3 days before the trial, explain this one to me. 3 days before the trial, Skip was offered the most insane deal I've ever heard. Now, I'm not in the legal field, so what I've heard and haven't heard probably isn't that consequential, but listen to this. They offered him 1 year in jail to plead guilty to only endangering a minor if he would tell them where Theresa's body was. There's a caveat. If the body had evidence that he had done something to her, he would be charged with murder. Okay? But 1 year in jail. And he said no. He said, no, absolutely not. Bigfoot got her. I don't know where Bigfoot took her. I mean, he probably consumed her. Or God only knows what he thought Bigfoot did with her. But the authorities wanted so badly to charge him with murder, and they realized that they probably wouldn't get a guilty verdict until they had a body. But a body was never found. So an indictment was never made. Skip lived the rest of his life free. He would die in 1998 at the age of 54 of heart disease. Now, why did the police do this? Because they wanted to avoid double jeopardy. There's a law in America where you can only be tried once for the same crime. So if they charged him with murder without the body and he was found not guilty, and then later on they found the body and there was proof, he couldn't be charged again. And they were trying to avoid that. But no evidence ever came forward, so he simply died at the age of 54 in 1998. Blind Johnny passed from cancer in 2008, so 10 years after. And like I said, Theresa has never been found. Now, I would really like to think that she managed to get away and start a new life for herself, and she's now living with her lovely husband and 2 kids in Akron. But most likely, Skip did her in. I've read a few different theories, but the one that I think makes the most sense is that Skip killed Theresa thinking she was Bigfoot. That's why he could brag that he hadn't SA'd her. So I can understand him being I don't understand being high on meth, but if he was high on meth, right, which he was pretty much all the time, and he became delusional, and she said something or did something, or he just looked at her in a certain way, and the light hit her in such a way that he was convinced that she was Bigfoot, and he decided, and then he took her out because he was afraid, right? Bigfoot's a monster. And then when he's just a little more lucid, he sees her and is like, oh no, what do I do? Well, okay, I mean, he was going to kill her anyway, so that's not that big of a deal. But he can totally get credit for the fact that he didn't do half the things he was going to do to her, which is sort of explains why he would say, but there won't be any sexual abuse on her. Nobody touched her, sexually, I swear. That's all speculation. That's just a theory, but it makes sense to my logical brain. Mostly, what this story taught me is that meth sucks. Really sucks. And the reason that those dopamine hits feel so good in our lives is because we don't experience artificial ones. We only experience the real ones, and that way the real ones are really beautiful, wonderful moments. But if you corrupt that by having artificial ones, then I don't understand how you could ever feel euphoria and joy again without it. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Don't do meth. Sorry, it seems like a silly piece of advice because I think everyone knows you shouldn't do meth. Okay, so let me know what you think below. And if you have time and the energy, give me a like or subscribe to my channel. It's super helpful to me. In the meantime, do me a favor, be nice to yourself. Drink more water, call your folks, If you're American, please have a voting plan, but mostly be nice to yourself. And I will catch you later. Bye.